Hello, my name is Daniel Beer. I'm a historian of modern Russia here at Royal Holloway, and I'm also the head of the history department. The relationship between Leninism and Stalinism has been, fiercely contested. So there's been a long sort of tradition of historians and indeed, people on the left who have tried to argue that we shouldn't throw, the kind of communist baby out with the Stalinist bathwater, that we need to disentangle Stalinism from the revolutionary project. I mean, the most influential exponent of this view was, of course, Leon Trotsky, who wrote, very sort of self-serving histories of the Russian Revolution, which basically said, if it had been me, everything would have turned out great. So the question is then, to what extent is Stalin, to use Trotsky's phrase, was Stalin a kind of gravedigger of the revolution? I mean, did he take something that was fundamentally progressive and utopian and then perverted it and corrupted it and turned it into a personal dictatorship that then visited all of these appalling crimes on the, on the Soviet people, from man-made famine during the collectivization campaigns to, the persecution of political opponents and the imprisonment of millions and millions of Soviet citizens who were, entirely innocent of any crime. So some historians have argued that the version of Leninism that had developed was one that, in the 1920s was still relatively kind of, it was relatively open. It could have developed in a variety of different directions, but it gets sort of pulled in a particular direction, partly by the way that, circumstances develop on the ground. So the problems of, managing the economy during the new economic policy, it seems to have kind of hit the buffers by, the sort of middle end of the 1920s. It's not helping to modernize the country rapidly enough, and the Bolsheviks feel, not unreasonably, that they are encircled by hostile capitalist imperialist powers and that war is a matter of when, not if. But I think there are other historians, and I suppose I would subscribe to that view, who say that essentially the bedrock of the Stalinist dictatorship is already in place by the time Lenin is politically, incapacitated. So by 1922, Lenin's already suffered from the first of his strokes and is really kind of, is being rapidly marginalized. But already by then, this is a regime that has shown itself ready to rule by force and by really extraordinary levels of violence. It has shown itself capable of repressing very, very violently any opposition to the dominance of the Bolshevik Party, even from within the revolutionary camp. If we think about the suppression of the Kronstadt rebellion in March 1921, and that the structure of the party is one that has privileged top-down, centralized leadership over any kind of sort of democratic accountability. So that really the kind of the bedrock of the Stalinist state has already been laid under Lenin, and that what we're really talking about are sort of strong lines of kind of continuity. I mean, albeit with kind of radicalization, but strong lines of continuity between the policies of the Civil War and the early 1920s, and then the so-called revolution from above, collectivization, industrialization, the mass purges of the 1930s. So there's sort of an intensification of some of these policies, and one can legitimately certainly, question whether, had it not been for Stalin, there might not have been some of the worst excesses of the state terror in the mid-1930s. But this would still have been a regime that ruled through terror. There would still have been an enormous network of labour camps into which, everybody ranging from, political opponents to common criminals and, suspect national minorities, would probably have been expelled. So there's kind of a logic which comes out of the revolution based around, the suppression of private property, the suppression of the market, the curtailment of political freedoms, the curtailment of religious freedoms, which all push the state in the direction of wagering on violence as a way of maintaining its domination over society. And I and many of my colleagues would argue that to frame Stalin, as Trotsky did, as someone who took what was essentially a noble and progressive enterprise and then destroyed it from within, is to basically misrepresent all of the repressive features of the regime that were firmly embedded when Joseph Stalin was still basically a sort of middling bureaucrat within the upper within the leadership of the Bolshevik Party.